Here's a fact that sounds almost impossible until you understand it. One of the reasons Europe is burning this summer is that it rained too much last winter. That's not a typo, and it's not a joke. The lush green landscapes that soaked up all that winter rain became the perfect fuel for the infernos now tearing across Spain, France, and Italy. 3 countries, hundreds of thousands of people driven from their homes, entire towns, reduced to smoke and ash. And when you ask the scientists who study this whether they're shocked, whether they saw this coming, the chilling answer is no, they're not shocked at all. In fact, one leading researcher looking at these exact fires said plainly that they are precisely what was expected. This catastrophe was, in a real sense, predicted. So today, we're not just going to look at what's burning. We're going to break down why. Why now? Why so intense? Why all at once? And why experts have been warning that summers exactly like this one were coming. Because once you understand the machinery behind these fires, you understand something crucial about the world we're now living in. This is a developing situation, so the specifics are based on the latest information as of this recording. But the deeper story, the chain of causes behind this disaster, is what I really want you to walk away understanding, because it's the part that actually explains everything. Before we dive in, though, do me one quick favor, because it genuinely helps this channel. Drop a comment right now and tell me where you're watching from, and whether the summers where you live have felt more extreme lately. Hotter, drier, smokier, stranger. Because what's happening in Europe is connected to a bigger pattern, and I'm curious how it looks from where you are. And if you want to actually understand the forces shaping these disasters, instead of just seeing the scary footage, hit that subscribe button. It's free, it takes 1 second, and it means you'll always get the real explanation, not just the headline. A thumbs up helps push this out to more people who deserve to understand it. All right, let's get into it. Let's build the explanation step by step, because this disaster is like a chain of dominoes, and each one had to fall for us to end up here. The first domino was the heat. Earlier this summer, Europe endured a record-breaking heat wave. Not just a hot spell, but historic, above-average temperatures across huge stretches of the continent. And the heat didn't just pass through and leave. Forecasters warned that these elevated temperatures would persist through July, and potentially beyond, keeping the whole region baking week after week. Extreme heat does something specific and dangerous to a landscape. It draws the moisture out of everything, the soil, the plants, the dead leaves and branches on the forest floor. It essentially pre-dries the entire environment, turning living, green vegetation into something that will catch and burn with terrifying ease. Heat is the ignition switch for a fire season, and this summer, Europe's switch got flipped hard and held down. And this ties into a longer trend that's worth naming. Across the Mediterranean, fire seasons have been getting longer and more intense over the years. What used to be a concentrated stretch of high risk in the peak of summer has been stretching out earlier into spring and later into autumn, as heat arrives sooner and lingers longer. Recent years have delivered a string of brutal fire seasons across southern Europe, with record-breaking areas burned and repeated states of emergency. So while every individual summer has its own specific weather, the backdrop is a region where the window of danger has been widening. 2026's record June heat, arriving on top of that longer-term trend, didn't just create a bad day or a bad week, it primed an entire continent for a season of extremes. And crucially, extreme heat and wildfires feed on each other in a nasty loop. The heat dries the land and drives the fires, and the fires themselves pump heat, smoke, and carbon into the atmosphere, which does nothing to help the underlying conditions. It's a self-reinforcing cycle, and this summer we're watching it spin. Now the second domino, and this is the one that surprises everyone, you'd assume that a wet winter would protect against fire. More water, less burning, right? But it actually worked in reverse, and understanding why is key to understanding this whole disaster. This past winter across much of Europe was unusually wet. All that rain and moisture caused vegetation to grow thick and abundant. Grasses, shrubs, brush, and undergrowth flourished, carpeting the landscape in green. For a few months, everything looked lush and healthy. But that abundant growth was a loaded gun. Because when the record heat and the drought that followed arrived in summer, all of that thick vegetation dried out and turned into an enormous reservoir of fuel. Instead of a landscape with sparse, scattered things to burn, you had a landscape packed wall to wall with dry, flammable material. The wet winter didn't prevent the fires, it fed them. It's a brutal, counterintuitive lesson in how these systems actually work. Sometimes the ingredients for a disaster are laid down months in advance, in conditions that look nothing like danger at the time. So now we have the setup. A landscape loaded with fuel, then baked bone dry by record heat and drought. All that's missing is a spark and some wind. And that's the third domino. Once a fire starts in conditions like these, the way it behaves is genuinely frightening. and it explains why firefighters have been describing these blazes as beyond their ability to control. Let me walk you through the fire behavior because it's important. When a fire ignites in dry, dense fuel under hot, windy conditions, it doesn't just spread, it accelerates. The wind pushes the flames forward while feeding them oxygen, and the fire can advance faster than a person can run. Worse, an intense fire throws burning embers high into the air, and the wind carries them hundreds of yards ahead of the main fire, where they land and start brand new fires. That's called spotting, and it's the reason crews can carve out a fire break, hold a line, and then watch helplessly as the fire simply leaps over it and reignites on the other side. The most intense wildfires can even generate their own weather, creating powerful updrafts, erratic winds, and in extreme cases pyrocumulus clouds that make the fire's behavior wildly unpredictable. When a fire reaches that state, there is no putting it out in the moment. The best that even the world's finest firefighters can do is protect lives, defend what structures they can, and wait for the weather to change. That's why an emergency official in Spain openly admitted one of the fires near Madrid was, at its peak, beyond the capacity of crews to contain. It wasn't a failure of effort, it was physics. And here's a dimension of these fires that often gets overlooked, but that's central to why they matter so much. The damage extends far beyond the flames themselves. As these fires burn through vast stretches of forest and brush, they release enormous plumes of smoke that travel for hundreds of miles, degrading air quality across regions nowhere near the actual fire lines. In parts of the affected countries, people have been urged to stay indoors with their windows and doors shut against heavy, sometimes toxic smoke. That smoke carries fine particles that are genuinely hazardous to breathe, especially for children, the elderly, and anyone with heart or lung conditions. Meaning a fire in one province can send tens of thousands of people in another, reaching for inhalers and sealing their homes. Beyond the immediate health toll, these fires also release massive amounts of carbon that had been stored in the forests, and they destroy the very vegetation that would otherwise help absorb it. So a wildfire isn't just a local disaster that ends when the flames are out. It leaves a long shadow of polluted air, lost ecosystems, and released carbon that ripples outward in space and forward in time. When you tally the true cost of a season like this, the burned acres are only the beginning. Now, here's where the why gets really striking, because the numbers reveal that this isn't just a bad week. It's a statistically extreme year. According to Copernicus, which is Europe's official climate monitoring service, the data for 2026 is staggering. France has already experienced roughly 3.5 times as many fires as its annual average. Let that number sink in. 3.5 times the normal amount, and the summer isn't even over. Spain, meanwhile, has seen around 1.5 to nearly twice its typical number of fires. These aren't vague impressions. This is hard data from the agency whose entire job is to monitor Europe's climate, and it confirms that what we're witnessing is far outside the range of a normal fire season. It's an outlier, an extreme, a year that stands apart from what these countries are used to. And it's worth understanding what Copernicus actually is, because it lends weight to these figures. It's the European Union's flagship Earth observation program, using a fleet of satellites and a vast network of ground data to monitor the continent's climate, atmosphere, and land, including a dedicated system that tracks wildfires across Europe in near real time. So when Copernicus reports that France has burned at 3.5 times its normal rate, that's not a guess or a headline writer's embellishment. It's drawn from continuous satellite monitoring, designed specifically to measure exactly this. These are the people whose entire mission is to keep an objective, data-driven eye on the continent. And their data is telling a clear story. 2026 has pushed France, Spain, and much of southern Europe into genuinely anomalous territory, well beyond the normal year-to-year swings. When the objective monitoring systems and the on-the-ground reality both point to extreme, you can be confident the label is earned. And this is the point where we have to talk about the bigger picture, because the scientists studying these fires are connecting them to something larger, and they're not being shy about it. Researchers who specialize in wildfires and desertification have looked at this exact situation and said, in effect, this is exactly what we predicted would happen. One expert based in Valencia, Spain, a region that has itself been touched by these fires, made the point directly. For decades, scientists have warned that if global temperatures kept climbing, the consequences would be serious, including a significant increase in the frequency, the size, and the intensity of wildfires. And now, he noted, that's precisely what we're seeing play out. This is the part that should give everyone pause. These fires are not a random stroke of bad luck. They are the realization of a warning that scientists have been issuing for years, the predicted result of a warming climate meeting the natural fire-prone landscapes of the Mediterranean. Even public figures have framed it in these terms. As the fires raged across Spain, France, and the United Kingdom, Prince William described them as a stark reminder of the challenges posed by an increasingly extreme climate. And whatever your views on the broader politics of climate, the underlying physical logic here is straightforward and widely accepted by the scientific community. A hotter atmosphere pulls more moisture out of landscapes, extends and intensifies droughts, and creates more days each year with the kind of extreme fire weather, heat, dryness, and wind combined, that turns a spark into a catastrophe. It doesn't necessarily start the fires. Ignitions can come from many sources, both natural and human. But it loads the dice, making the conditions for explosive, uncontrollable fires more common and more severe. That's the mechanism the data and the experts keep pointing to, and this summer in Europe is a textbook demonstration of it. Now, I want to be balanced and honest here, because a full understanding requires nuance. Wildfires are not new to the Mediterranean. This is a region that has always burned. Fire is a natural part of these ecosystems, and Spain, France, Italy, Greece, and Portugal have battled summer wildfires for as long as anyone can remember. Some plant species there are even adapted to fire, so it would be wrong to say fire itself is the anomaly. And there are other factors in the mix too, beyond temperature. Things like how land is managed, whether forests and brush are thinned or left to accumulate, where people build homes relative to wildland, and the sources of ignition, many of which are human, whether accidental or deliberate. All of these play a role in how bad a fire season gets. The scientific point isn't that climate is the only factor, it's that a warming climate is stacking the deck on top of all those existing factors, pushing an already fire-prone region toward more frequent and more extreme events than it has historically faced. That's the honest, complete picture, a natural hazard, amplified. And the fact that this is happening across so much of the continent at once is itself part of the evidence. This isn't one unlucky country. As Spain and France burn, fires have also been tearing through Greece and Turkey, burning in Portugal, and even flaring up in the United Kingdom, a nation that most people would never associate with wildfire at all. When you see a hazard striking simultaneously across an entire continent, from the Iberian Peninsula to the eastern Mediterranean and all the way up to Britain, it points to a shared, large-scale driver rather than a series of local coincidences. The common thread tying together fires in a dozen different countries is the broad envelope of extreme heat and dryness sitting over the whole region. That's what a systemic problem looks like, as opposed to an isolated one. So what does the why tell us about what's coming next? Unfortunately, it tells us the danger isn't over, and may not be for a while, because the underlying conditions that created this disaster are still in place. European authorities have warned that extreme wildfire danger could persist through August. In France, even as crews fight the current blazes, the region is bracing for yet another intense heat wave, with temperatures forecast to push toward 40 degrees Celsius, over 104 Fahrenheit, and no significant rain on the horizon. Think about what that means through the lens of everything we just discussed. The fuel is still dry, the heat is coming back, the dice are still loaded. So the fires burning now could flare up again, and new ones could ignite with frightening ease. Understanding the why is exactly what tells us this. As long as those conditions persist, the threat persists. This is not a single event that's winding down. It's a season, and the season still has dangerous weeks ahead. Let me zoom out to the biggest picture takeaway because I think it's the most important thing to understand from all of this. What we're watching in Europe is, in a sense, a preview, a demonstration of how a warming world reshapes the risks we face. It's not that a hotter climate invents brand new disasters out of nothing. It's that it takes hazards humanity has always dealt with, heat waves, droughts, wildfires, storms, and amplifies them, making them more frequent, more intense, and more likely to strike several places at once, overwhelming the systems built to handle them. The wet winter turned tinderbox paradox, the record heat, the statistically off-the-charts fire. Numbers, the experts saying, "We told you so." They all point to the same conclusion the scientists have been drawing for years. And whether these specific fires are burning near you or on the other side of the world, that's a pattern worth understanding, because the forces behind it aren't confined to Europe. So what can you actually take from all this? First, if you live anywhere with a fire-prone climate, parts of the American West, Australia, the Mediterranean, and increasingly places that never used to worry about it, understand your own risk and take the season seriously when conditions turn hot and dry. The same chain of dominoes that fell in Europe can fall elsewhere. Know your community's evacuation plans, keep alerts turned on during high-risk periods, and never underestimate how fast one of these fires can move. If you live in a fire-prone area, there are concrete steps that genuinely make a difference. Clearing dry brush and flammable material away from your home, having a go bag ready with documents and essentials, agreeing on a family meeting point and communication plan, and knowing more than one route out of your neighborhood in case the first is cut off. Exactly the kind of trap those tourists in Italy found themselves in. None of it is dramatic, and all of it can be done on an ordinary afternoon. But when a fire moves faster than you can think, the preparation you did in the calm is what carries you through the chaos. Second, support the people on the front lines. Across Spain, France, Italy, and beyond, firefighters and rescue crews are fighting these blazes in brutal, dangerous conditions. And countries are lending each other crews and aircraft in a genuine show of solidarity. The established relief and emergency organizations working in the affected areas are doing critical work, and supporting them is one of the most concrete ways to help. And it's worth knowing that this cross-border cooperation isn't just spontaneous goodwill. Europe has built systems for exactly this kind of shared crisis. When a country's own resources are overwhelmed, it can call on a continent-wide mechanism through which other nations send firefighters, water-bombing planes, and equipment to wherever the need is greatest. That's why you've seen Greek, Italian, and Portuguese crews helping in Spain even as those countries manage risks of their own. It's a recognition that in an era when multiple nations can be ablaze at the same time, no single country can always go it alone. Investing in that shared capacity, more aircraft, better coordination, stronger prevention, and land management earlier. Warning systems is a big part of how the continent is trying to adapt to a reality where seasons like this one may become less of an exception. Adaptation and preparedness won't stop the fires from starting, but they can be the difference between a hard season and a catastrophic one. And third, stay informed with real information. In a disaster this large and this politically charged, misinformation and exaggeration spread fast. Lean on official sources, established science, and reputable reporting, because understanding what's actually happening and why is the foundation of responding to it wisely, both as individuals and as societies. Here's the honest bottom line. The massive destruction sweeping across Spain, France, and Italy is real. It's severe, and it is far more than random bad luck. It's the product of a clear and understandable chain of causes, a wet winter that grew abundant fuel, a record heat wave and drought that dried that fuel into a tinderbox, and fire behavior so extreme it has outrun even the best firefighters, all set against a backdrop of a warming climate that scientists say is making exactly these kinds of catastrophes more frequent and more intense, just as they warned it would. The data confirms this is an extreme year, the experts confirm it was expected, and with more heat on the way and no rain in sight, the story is not over. Understanding why this is happening is the first step toward taking it seriously, and it demands to be taken seriously. I'm going to keep tracking this crisis and the forces behind it, every new fire, every shift in the conditions, every development across Europe and beyond. If you want to actually understand these disasters instead of just reacting to them, subscribe right now so you don't miss an update, because the why is what helps all of this make sense. And it's what I'm committed to bringing you. Hit that like button to help this reach more people who deserve the real explanation. And drop a comment. Where are you watching from? And have the summers where you live started to feel more extreme? Tell me. I read every single one, and I'll see you in the next one. Stay safe, stay informed, and look out for one another out there.